technologies, damaging technologies, or technologies that, are being sold as green but are actually harmful.
We got to go. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here and talking to us about your article in the Weekly Standard. That does it for today's Washington Journal. Live coverage of the House.
Debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, for 5 minutes.
Well, I was initially very supportive of the President's proposed Buffett tax based on the premise that no millionaire or billionaire should pay a lower tax rate than a checkout clerk at the Albertsons supermarket or a small business owner who only earns $40,000 a year. Seemed fair to me, but, then I started listening to the Republican response, and it's pretty heavy, and it really gives you pause to think about whether or not this is a good idea for our country. It's class warfare. It will hurt job creation. These are arguments, it won't raise money. These are arguments that certainly are very, very telling. In fact, I have some direct quotes from one representative. This is really the Dr. Kevorkian plan for our economy. It'll kill jobs, kill businesses, yes, even kill the higher tax revenues these suicidal tax increasers hope to gain. And another representative, class warfare may win political campaigns, but it doesn't spur economic growth. Raising the capital gains tax may garner political capital, but it will not create any jobs. And then finally, of course, when are we going to get it? We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. Those are heavy criticisms. And just think if they proved true, what a disaster it would be for America. Now, of course, these criticisms all were leveled in 1993, the last time we had a Democratic president propose that millionaires and billionaires should pay a fair rate of taxes in this country. The first one was from Representative Christopher Cox, a total idiot who ran the Securities Exchange Commission while Wall Street gambled our economy into the tank. He said the part about killing jobs and we wouldn't get jobs and we wouldn't get higher revenues. Well, actually, with the Clinton tax increases, we did get higher revenues, we did balance the budget, we did pay off debt, and we had 3.8% unemployment. And we were asking the job creators, the millionaires and billionaires, to pay a fair share. I guess Chris was wrong. Well, let's see. The second one was from former Representative Price from Ohio about political capital not creating any jobs. Well, we already addressed that. We had 3.8% unemployment. What have they done to create a single job so far this year? Nothing. In fact, they've eliminated jobs. But that's because we want to give the job creators a break. We don't want to tax them, all to protect tax cuts. And then finally, the final quote about we have a revenue problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem is from then Representative Boehner, now Speaker Boehner. Now, of course, our taxes are at 15% of our gross domestic product. Considerably lower than the percent of taxes that were levied in the Reagan era. And we do have a revenue problem. $5 trillion of tax cuts over the last decade. $5 trillion, 5,000 billion dollars of tax cuts, heavily oriented toward the job creators, the millionaires and the billionaires. Where are the jobs? Where are the jobs? It doesn't work. First, it was 8 years of Bush tax cuts, then 2 years of Bush-Obama tax cuts, and now we had President Obama's proposed further tax cuts. Tax cuts don't create jobs. Now, I think, actually, now I've considered their arguments, the President's right. Billionaire hedge fund speculators on Wall Street. Let's think about it. Their rate of taxation is 15% on billions of dollars of income. Small business owner, $50,000 a year. Whoa, more than twice that. Army captain, just back from defending America in Afghanistan. Whoa, more than twice that. Who gives more value to this society? The parasite on Wall Street who's speculating and driving up the price of our fuel and making billions of dollars doing it? or the Army captain or the small business owner, the real job creators. We can, by levying a fair rate of taxes on the millionaires and billionaires, under the Buffett tax, the best investor in this country who thinks this is the direction we should go, we can both create jobs, stabilize the economy, get down the deficit, and continue to fund critical programs. Ironically, in the grand deal that was adopted back here a month ago that I voted against, there was only one specified cut. One cut specified in that bill. Graduate student financial aid. That's because at the country club, they don't meet anybody who can't put their kids through medical school. We need doctors. We need other professionals. We need to help the next generation succeed. Education, infrastructure, investment, and we need money to pay for it.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this morning to talk about how our president has systematically and relentlessly attacked the general aviation industry. You know, this is one of the few last great manufacturing gems left in America. It creates 1.2 million jobs. The gentleman before me was speaking about jobs. 1.2 million jobs in America and $150 billion worth of income and tremendous amount of exports. This industry is enormously important to my district, but not just my district, the air capital of the world, but all across the country. These are good jobs. These are middle-class jobs. They're jobs for machinists and welders and riveters and managers and purchasing people who make some of the finest airplanes in the world. But instead of supporting the general aviation industry and welcoming those jobs, the president has attacked it. At the very least, he could just leave it alone. But this is part of his larger class warfare effort. He demonizes general aviation users. He calls them corporate fat cat jet owners at every turn. But it's not impacting the folks who use those as business tools. It's impacting the people who build these airplanes. They're productive, they're working to grow their businesses, and they're growing jobs. His rhetoric kills sales of American manufactured goods, and with them the jobs that are created when those airplanes are built. You know, he's attacked it in multiple ways. Most recently, the Department of Transportation issued something called BAR. It's a program which has long ensured basic privacy rights for general aviation aircraft users by allowing them to opt out of being tracked by everybody with an internet connection. But on August 2nd, the FAA changed that rule and said, no, now anyone with an internet connection can find out and violate the privacy rights of anybody who decides to fly in an airplane all across the country, unless they specifically opt out and can state a valid security threat. This is an unprecedented step. It will facilitate serious violations of privacy, and it doesn't help create jobs in America. I've introduced a piece of legislation called the BAR Act, along with Kansas Senator Pat Roberts, and I'd urge my colleagues to support that legislation. It will create jobs in America. And now the President most recently announced, as part of his efforts to reduce the deficit, user fees on general aviation aircraft, over $100 per flight. Not to mention the enormous bureaucracy it will take to collect this set of taxes. At a time when America's got unemployment of 1 in 6 or more, it's no time to add taxes on folks who are trying to fly their airplanes around this country, to get from Topeka to Des Moines, to get to small towns, to support American manufacturing. This president wants to put taxes on general aviation users. And finally, let me just talk for a moment about the taxes and the rhetoric. Mr. President, this industry is not asking for a handout. This president mistakes hardworking people for folks who are looking for something from the federal government. All we ask is to be left alone. We don't want the bailouts that the city of Detroit received and that the automotive folks received. We're not asking for tax favoritism. All we're asking is that you respect the hardworking people of Kansas and all across America who build the finest airplanes in the world. This is, Mr. Speaker, failed leadership. We have $4 trillion in additional debt and a loss of 2 million jobs under this president. Don't give us a bailout. Don't give us a handout. We don't want special favors. Simply leave us alone to grow and create good, middle-class, hard-working people's jobs right in Kansas and right in America. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, in a speech before the Economic Club of Washington, Speaker Boehner had used this tried and true Republican applause line: excessive regulations are making it harder for our economy to create jobs. But then he followed up with a real-life example. Last month, federal agents raided Gibson guitar factories in Tennessee. Gibson is a well-respected American company that employs thousands of people. The company's costs were $2 to $3 million. Why? Because Gibson bought wood overseas to make guitars in America. Seriously. Well, seriously, Mr. Speaker, you were seriously, well, not necessarily you. I know you can't write all your speeches, but you were done a disservice by your speechwriters who could have done a little more research about the background of what was happening there. Because the federal government was involved with enforcing the Lacey Act, which actually makes it easier to protect American jobs and manufacture here at home. In 2008, I was pleased to be part of leading an effort working with the Bush administration in a bipartisan fashion to amend the Lacey Act, which bars trade in illegally harvested species to include trade in illegally harvested timber. Illegal logging threatens some of the world's richest and most vulnerable forests, but more important, it threatens tens of thousands of jobs right here in the United States. Over 50 trade associations, nonprofits, unions representing the entire range of the U.S. economy signed statements supporting this amendment to the Lacey Act and its proper implementation. This is serious business. People who cheat by knowingly using wood products that are brought illegally overseas cost American jobs. The estimate was over $1 billion every year in lost opportunities and lower prices because of the illegal logging. We wanted to increase American jobs here at home, so we created a mechanism so that people would have an incentive to stop cheating, to stop competing unfairly against American businesses that are following the rules. It's interesting to note that in 2009, when the Gibson was first brought to the attention of the enforcement agencies and a process started because of concerns that they may have taken illegal timber from Madagascar, on the floor of the House, over 400 representatives voted in favor of a resolution I had condemning illegal logging in Madagascar. We find that there are people right here in the United States who understand this dynamic. The success of the Lacey Act rests on a simple principle: rewarding companies that follow the law while shedding light on bad actors. It ensures that American business using foreign wood, like guitar makers, pay attention to the sources of their wood. We had very powerful testimonies of what happened in illegal logging. It doesn't just destroy fragile ecosystems and threaten a scarce and dwindling supply of rare species of wood. It destabilizes those countries. The people who are engaged in the traffic of illegal timber threaten, they corrupt, and sometimes they kill. And it is possible to figure this out. People need to pay attention. Guitar makers like C.F. Martin Guitar are strongly supportive of the law. I quote, "I think the Lacey Act is a wonderful thing. I think illegal logging is appalling," the company's CEO Chris Martin said in a recent interview. "It should stop. And if this is what it takes to stop unscrupulous operators, I'm all for it." Mr. Speaker, this is serious business. Being able to have protections to protect American manufacturers from unfair competition by people who skirt the rules, people who cheat, is in everybody's interest. Let's let the process ongoing right now work its way out. Let's see if there's a problem. But by all means, we ought to protect the integrity of the Lacey Act, which is designed to save these tens of thousands of jobs here at home and the environment abroad. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent, for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to emphasize one more time that the federal government doesn't create jobs. It's small businesses and entrepreneurs. You just heard my friend talk about Gibson guitars and vilify Gibson guitars because they purchased wood from a foreign operator, an operator that violated a law of another country and brought that wood to America for Gibson guitars, one of the oldest American producers of guitars today. Gibson Guitars employs people in America. Gibson Guitars has done things that may be reprehensible to some. Obviously, to those that are employed by their company, it's not. As we move along, you know, we need to remember about what jobs are created by small manufacturers. What is this federal government supposed to do? This federal government not only raided Gibson Guitars, told them to close down their lines, lay people off work, or, hey, they have a better idea. Why don't you just move your operation to another country? That's what this administration's message is to manufacturers and the job creators in America. If you don't like it, just go ahead and move to another country. Take those jobs and give it to someone else other than Americans. I think we're just wrong-headed in our approach. We look at regulations as an end-all to everything, just not common-sense solutions. When we talk about creating jobs in America, you know, I've been across my district and I asked the small job creators, the small businesses, what can we do in D.C. to help you? And they said, Mr. Congressman, just get out of our way. Allow us to do the things that we need to do to create jobs here in America. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House this week will take up a bill called the TRAIN Act. The label, or that acronym, stands for Transparency and Regulatory Analysis of Impacts on the Nation. It's quite a mouthful. But what it's going to do, very specifically, is delay the implementation of two very important Clean Air Act standards that protect human health and the environment. Now, we can have a lot of arguments about proper regulation, which ones are good, which ones are bad. But can we really argue about the necessity of taking appropriate action to protect the air we breathe? The Clean Air Act has been very successful in improving air quality around this country. Obviously, much more needs to be done. But the two provisions that are under attack by the so-called TRAIN Act are, one, a regulation that regulates cross-state air pollution. Now, if you live in one state and there is a coal-burning plant in another state, the law of air motion means that the pollution is going to follow the path that the air travels. And people in a state that are on the receiving end of polluted air ought to have some protection. This has a significant impact on health. And it is not as though you can have appropriate regulatory safety without having the federal government have some role, since air does travel according to the law of physics, not according to an act of Congress. A second provision is the power plant emissions of mercury limitation. Mercury is a known carcinogen, extremely dangerous to our health, particularly of infants. And the success that we've had in limiting mercury pollution has had dramatic impacts, positive impacts on our health. Why would we delay the implementation of a mercury regulation that is going to have significant and immediate benefit? You know, there may be some cost to this. That's true. But what about the cost in lives? What about the cost in health care expenditures by allowing pollution to occur? You know, when we do something and price it cheaply by ignoring what the external impacts of allowing something to be theoretically cheap in the terms of lives lost, in terms of health care expenses incurred, we're not saving anybody money. We're making some money for the owners of the polluting entity, but we're not making money for society, and we're certainly not protecting it. We have to have careful regulation. We should always be willing to look at them to get rid of things that don't make sense and aren't getting the job done. But we also need proper regulation, and when it comes to health and safety, clean air, mercury, those are two provisions that should not be delayed. This legislation would do that. It's harmful to our health. It will be harmful to our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, Mrs. Loomis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Adam. Mr. Speaker, I rise today with a heart that is both heavy and full of pride. On September 14th, former U.S. Senator Malcolm Wallop passed away at the age of 78. Senator Wallop brought to the Congress his considerable influence, outspoken conservatism, and keen intelligence. The word statesman only begins to scratch the surface of Malcolm Wallop's accomplishments. After serving in the Wyoming legislature for several terms, Malcolm Wallop was elected to the United States Senate in 1976, a seat he held for 18 years. In the Senate, he served on numerous committees. He was the ranking member of Energy and Natural Resources and was the first non-lawyer in the history of the Senate to serve on the Judiciary Committee. His efforts on the Judiciary Committee led to the enactment of the first international parental kidnapping statute protecting children from being abducted overseas by non-custodial parents. Through his work on finance, Congress cut inheritance and gift taxes in 1981, which, among other things, ensured that ranching families could continue their operations upon the death of a family business partner. He was also a tireless promoter of free trade, making numerous trips abroad to promote GATT to reduce tariff barriers. Due to his service on the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, Senator Wallop served on the Helsinki Commission, which was charged with negotiating a number of complex arms control treaties, including SALT I, II, and III. Senator Wallop was one of the first persons outside of the old Soviet Union to meet with Alexander Solzhenitsyn while he was still a prisoner in the Gulag. In the cowboy state, Senator Wallop was a champion of protecting the Western way of life, including an amendment to the 1980 Clean Water Act prohibiting federal usurpation of state water rights, and an amendment to the Surface Mining Control Act that directed the federal government to compensate owners of mineral rights for the loss of the right to mine. Senator Wallop was one of the first legislators to lead the charge against the war on the West, which subordinated states' rights and severely limited multiple use of our public lands. In 1984, the Republican senator partnered with Democrat John Breaux of Louisiana to author the Wallop-Breaux Sport Fishing Restoration Act to promote boat safety and fish habitat conservation, along with enhancing fishing opportunities, including those of the handicapped. Senator Wallop was also committed to education and volunteerism. In 1979, Congress passed his legislation establishing the Congressional Awards Program, which is privately funded and is the only volunteer award given in the name of Congress. Wyoming is proud to have the most active participation in that program. Upon his retirement from Congress, Senator Wallop founded Frontiers of Freedom, a conservative think tank promoting individual freedom, fewer federal regulations, and smaller government. He was a man of supreme integrity, incredible intellect, and a quick wit, humble to a fault, and exceedingly kind. I am told he always had time to ask a Capitol Hill elevator operator or police officer about their family on his way to a vote. He had a tremendously devoted staff, many of whom worked for him for the full 18 years of his tenure in the Senate. Finally, Malcolm Wallop was the descendant of an entrepreneurial pioneer family who had roots in Wyoming and the British Isles as well. Senator Wallop's grandfather served not only in England's Parliament, but the Wyoming legislature. The first polo field in the United States was built on the Wallop family ranch at Bighorn, Wyoming. Senator Wallop was a man blessed with 4 wonderful children, many grandchildren, and his wife, Isabel. My thoughts and prayers are with his family. In their time of sadness, let them be comforted in the knowledge that Wyoming stands strong today because of Senator Wallop's untiring love of and commitment to our great state. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was a truly historic day in our country's struggle for equal rights for all people. Leaders of the United States Army sent a notice to soldiers serving around the globe that simply said the following, and I quote, "Today marks the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The law is repealed. From this day forward, gay and lesbian soldiers may serve in our Army with the dignity and respect they deserve. Our rules, regulations, and politics will apply uniformly without regard to sexual orientation, which is a personal and private matter." Mr. Speaker, 18 years after this hideous policy was first implemented, it is now gone. And the thousands of soldiers who were shamefully discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell may apply for re-enlistment. To the men and women whose service and sacrifice has made us so proud, we say, as of yesterday, you no longer have to live a lie. To them we say, you no longer have to choose between your personhood and your patriotism. To them who have had the courage to do right by America, we now say, your nation now has the courage to do what's right by you. Air Force Lieutenant Josh Seafried, a leader among gay and lesbian service members, describes the oppressive nature of this policy in this way. He said, "It consumes your thought process, it consumes your future because of the fear of getting caught." Mr. Speaker, it's incomprehensible to me that anyone, in particular brave, selfless members of our military, should live any day in fear of being caught. This step is hugely welcome, and it is long overdue. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was opposed by an overwhelming majority of Americans because it violated the values we claim to stand for as a nation. It was not only tearing at our moral fabric, it was undermining our military readiness and national security as well. At a time when we're asking so much of our service members, putting them on the front lines of 2 wars, we owe them, at the very least, and we have finally brought them the dignity of a discrimination-free workplace. I salute President Obama, and I salute our top military brass for their leadership in reversing this injustice. I salute the members of Congress, Democrat and Republican, who voted for the repeal. And of course, we all owe a debt of gratitude to those who've served with honor and integrity, those who defended American rights and freedoms even when America wouldn't afford them the same rights and freedoms. So, Mr. Speaker, now there will be no sanctioned bigotry or homophobia in the armed forces of the greatest country on earth. Our military will accept everyone who demonstrates their fitness to serve. Their sexuality will be irrelevant. They may be as open about it or as discreet about it as they choose. Good riddance to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Our country will be stronger, safer, and fairer without it. And while we support our troops by eliminating this wrong-minded policy, let's take the next step and support all of our troops, regardless of their sexual orientation, by bringing them home from Iraq and Afghanistan. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Perluisi, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the coming months represent a defining moment for our nation. Responsible leaders from both political parties understand that we must come together on behalf of the American people to create jobs for millions of unemployed workers and to put our nation on the path to fiscal stability. President Obama has transmitted the American Jobs Act to Congress, and I hope its key components will be enacted into law. The Super Committee has begun its work of proposing responsible ways to grow our economy while reducing our deficits. The work that lies ahead will not be easy, but it must be done. With this as backdrop, I rise this morning to discuss the Puerto Rico Investment Promotion Act, which I will introduce tomorrow. The bill is designed to attract investment to Puerto Rico and to create jobs on the island, where the unemployment rate over the last decade has consistently stood 6 to 8 percentage points above the national average. At the same time, the bill seeks to generate new revenue for the federal government and to encourage job-creating investment in the 50 states where unemployment now exceeds 9%. This bill is endorsed by Puerto Rico's Governor, Luis Fortuño, the leaders of Puerto Rico's two main political parties, and the island's business community. At the outset, it is important to explain why I'm promoting legislation of this sort. Like the states, the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico faces serious economic challenges. However, the economic problems of Puerto Rico have proven to be structural and chronic, not cyclical and temporary. I believe that Puerto Rico's economy will never unleash its tremendous potential under its current political status. And I support statehood for the island in part because history shows that every territory that joins the Union experiences substantial increases in its economic activity and standard of living. However, until a majority of Puerto Rico's people express a desire for statehood and Congress welcomes the island as a full member of the American family, it is incumbent upon me to take all reasonable steps to strengthen the island's economy within the severe constraints imposed by the current territorial status. My aspiration for Puerto Rico is that it will enjoy the political, social, and economic equality that only statehood offers. And I look forward to the day when it will no longer be necessary for Puerto Rico's leaders to petition the U.S. Congress for customized, island-specific legislation to encourage job-creating investment and to compensate, at least somewhat, for the countless ways in which our political status does damage to our people. But until that day arrives, we must be as pragmatic about the present as we are hopeful about the future. To explain the bill, a little background is in order. Currently, nearly all of the large U.S. firms that conduct business in Puerto Rico are organized as controlled foreign corporations, CFCs. A CFC's earnings are not subject to any federal taxation until they're distributed, usually in the form of a dividend to its U.S. parent, a process known as repatriation. CFCs in Puerto Rico and in foreign countries have little incentive to repatriate because those earnings, once received by the parent, are subject to full federal taxation. As a result, billions of dollars in CFC's earnings remain in foreign banks where they generate no federal revenue and create no American jobs. My legislation seeks to integrate Puerto Rico companies into the U.S. tax system. It would authorize but not require companies that are incorporated in Puerto Rico and that earn at least 50% of their income on the island to operate as domestic U.S. companies. The bill would promote consistency and uniformity by bringing the treatment of any electing Puerto Rico company in line with the current treatment of a Puerto Rico individual under Section 933 of the Internal Revenue Code. Specifically, an electing company would be subject to federal taxation on its worldwide income except on the income it earns in Puerto Rico. Because it is a domestic rather than a foreign firm, the Puerto Rico corporation could distribute its earnings to its U.S. parent in the form of a dividend under Section 243 of the tax code, which allows the parent to deduct a substantial amount of the dividend, depending on the parent's ownership stake in the subsidiary. Therefore, profits that were previously kept outside of the United States are now more likely to be brought back into this country, where they may be subject to reduced but still meaningful level of taxation under Section 243 and used to create jobs in America. Moreover, as I already noted under this legislation, electing companies will generate additional revenue and job creation in this country. I hope my colleagues will support this bill.
Expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This summer, I took part in the Speak Out for Good Jobs Now, Rebuild the American Dream Tour. Thousands of concerned Americans packed rooms across this country to share their stories of hardship, unemployment, and struggle. From these stories, my colleagues in the Congressional Progressive Caucus and I wrote the Rebuild the American Dream Jobs Framework, which outlines how we will put America back to work and get our economy moving again. I wanted to take some time today to share some of the stories and realities that we heard on this tour. My first story is from Kimberly Lawrence from my state of Arizona. She says, I waited more than 30 years to finally receive a modest inheritance from my grandmother's property. I used the money to make improvements on my home that my husband and I were buying and to open my own child care business. It happened that that year I opened is the same year the economy failed. I struggled to hold on, but when the new governor of Arizona stripped away child care subsidies and at the same time raised licensing fees by 200%, I lost nearly all of my clientele. I lived in a town that relied on hospitality jobs, which coupled with all else crippled the local economy and forced me out of business. My husband was laid off from the cabinet making job, and now, after struggling, our home is in foreclosure and set for auction. Everything I hoped for had finally taken shape, just to be ripped away. I have since left my husband and am now searching for a job in California. I have been applying and sending resumes for 6 months and have had only 2 interviews. I'm 50 years old, sleeping on my sister's couch with nothing to look forward to in my retirement. I suppose I simply won't have that pleasure. The other story comes from Bisma Ramdas of Florida. I live in Palm Beach County. I work for the largest hospital corporation in the world. I also have another job to make ends meet. I had a daughter that was born premature. The economy got bad. I lost money from the other job. Took time off to care for my wife and baby. And unable to make full payments to Chase for the mortgage, they eventually foreclosed my home. My wife and 3 girls moved out. Chase got money from the federal government for my house, and they got my house. Do I owe them money if they sell my house for less than I owe? Is that fair? Have I worked hard since I was 15 years old? I have worked hard since I was 15 years old. I have provided for my family, gladly pay my taxes. Is that fair? And the next story is also from Arizona, Tom Reisner. I'm retired and moderately well off financially. I've been doing a great deal of research on the economy and the history of these United States. I believe the middle class has suffered very much in the past 30 years. There has been a great shift of wealth. However, my greatest concern is for the present economy. We need to put people back to work. A second stimulus is needed, but aimed directly at the jobless. Much of these funds should be given to states for immediate relief. Teachers, police, firefighters, and many others have lost their jobs, plus others that have to create jobs in infrastructure and our roads. Also, those unemployed should be retrained to do useful work while they are unemployed. Thank you for listening. The American people are demanding we do something to get America back to work. These were just 3 of the stories we heard, and I hope that we listened, and I hope that all of Congress listens. The urgency is jobs. The demand from the American people is jobs, and our responsibility is to provide the American people with the opportunities of employment and a secure future. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge President Obama to take a strong stance against the Palestinian Authority's efforts to seek unilateral recognition for statehood from the United Nations. Mr. Speaker, Israel is our ally, an ally that has proven time and again a devotion to freedom, democracy, peace, and economic stability. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Israel is our greatest ally in the turbulent Middle East, and we need to support their efforts to resolve their issues with the Palestinians. The President must show that America is resolute in support of Israel and that he is determined that we find real solutions for peace in the Mideast. Mr. Speaker, solutions between Israel and the Palestinians will come through good faith negotiations and cooperation. Solutions and peace come through both sides sitting at the table with equal determination to reach an agreement. I hope that the President realizes all of this and that he will show America's support for Israel and be a strong voice for peace reached through negotiations and partnership. The President should make clear to the Palestinian Authority that the way to a bright and stable future for the Palestinian people will be through talking to Israel, not unilaterally seeking statehood through the UN. I urge all of my colleagues in this House and the members of the Senate to join me in this call, and with that I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. Seeing no further debate, pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
The House is taking a brief recess. They'll return at noon Eastern.